Hi and welcome to our third video on trigonometry. In this video we're going to introduce a mnemonic called SOHCAHTOA, and we're going to talk about what it means. In the next couple of videos after this we'll show you how to use it to solve problems. Alright, well we've already talked about the word trigonometry and how it means three-sided measurement or measurement of triangles, the length of sides and the size of angles. We've already spoken about how important triangles can be in today's society. And we've already talked about in level 1 trigonometry, we only deal with right angled triangles, which have a 90-degree angle, which is used, we put a little square in the corner to show that it's a right angle. Right, well now we're going to introduce an angle on the inside of the triangle, an interior angle, and we're going to label it with the symbol theta. Theta is a letter of the Greek alphabet. Now, we talked about this word before, hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right angle triangle. In Pythagoras, in the first two videos, we cheated and called it A, B, and C. And now we're going to come back and talk about the word hypotenuse and some other names. The hypotenuse we're going to shorten to H. The hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle. Right, well the next side we're going to talk about is the opposite. The opposite side is the side that is opposite to the angle theta. We're going to use O for opposite, and when I say opposite, it has to be away from the angle theta, not touching it. And finally, the third side is called the adjacent. The adjacent is the side that's next to the angle theta. We're going to use A for adjacent, and the adjacent is the side that touches theta. All right, well let's mix it up and change our triangle around and put theta down the bottom here. Well, the hypotenuse stays in the same place, but notice the opposite and adjacent swap around because the opposite has to be opposite away from the angle theta and the adjacent has to be touching the angle theta. What if I flip my triangle around or rotate it around like this? What's going on now? So again, here's my hypotenuse. The long diagonal is the hypotenuse. And the adjacent and opposite are these sides. Remember, the opposite has to be away from the angle theta, and the adjacent has to touch the angle theta. Right, well, you need to get used to that and practice that until you're really confident with labeling the sides hypotenuse, adjacent, and opposite. So let's move on to what does SOHCAHTOA mean. Well, here's our mnemonic, SOHCAHTOA. Let's start with SOH. The S represents a word called sine, S-I-N-E, sine. On the calculator, we get lazy and abbreviate it to S-I-N. It's not pronounced sin, it's pronounced sine. Now, the O represents the opposite side. We just spoke about three sides of a triangle, and the opposite is one of the sides. And the H represents the hypotenuse side. So if we're ever using the SOH rule, we need to use the opposite and the hypotenuse side. Right, let's talk about ka. Ka represents the word, the C represents cosine. And it gets lazy on the calculator and we abbreviate it to cos, but it's pronounced cosine. Now the A represents the adjacent side and the H represents the hypotenuse side. So if we're ever trying to use the cosine rule, we need to be working with the adjacent and the hypotenuse. Finally, if we look at TOA, the T represents a word called tangent, and again the calculator gets lazy and shortens it to tan. The O represents the opposite, and the A represents the adjacent. So once again, if we're trying to use the tangent rule, the tan rule, we need to be using the opposite and the adjacent sides. So this is SOHCAHTOA, this is what it represents. If we look on our calculator, you should be able to find it on your calculator, the three buttons, the sine, the cosine, and the tangent buttons, all next to each other. Great, well thanks for watching, and in the next couple of videos we'll show you how to use SOHCAHTOA to solve problems.